So good evening and welcome to Copperfield's Books virtual event with Marianne Wiggins in conversation with Cheryl Cutler. My name is Jamie and I'll be your host for the evening. We have such a wonderful program for you tonight and I'm so thrilled you could join us. A couple things before we get started. Books, your signed books. They will land in stores next week. I will be following up early next week. I will be following up with everyone individually to know when to show up and which location. So be on the lookout for that. And now I'd love to introduce tonight's author. Marianne Wiggins is the author of 8 books of fiction, including John Dollar and Evidence of Things Unseen, and 2 short story collections. Evidence of Things Unseen was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and the National Book Award. She has won a Whiting Award, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, the Heidinger Kafka Prize, and was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. And she currently lives in Los Angeles. In conversation with Marianne tonight is our very own Cheryl Cutler. With 38 years in the book business, she has what many would describe as the dream job. As a senior book buyer for Copperfields, she reads incessantly while working with publishers, authors, and editors to discover the best new titles. Over the past 8 years, her role has expanded to include serving as a jurist for a number of book awards, including the National Book Foundation's Annual Fiction Award, one of the nation's most prestigious literary prizes. Now, they are with us tonight to celebrate Marianne's stunning new book, Properties of Thirst. And I'm going to hand it straight over to you, Cheryl. Why don't you get us started?
Great. I am so excited to do this, Marianne. I have loved your books for eons, for all the time that you've been writing them. What I wanted to do, talking to the audience now, before Marianne reads a little bit, is to give you a kind of a basic sense of what is going on with Properties of Thirst, this magnificent novel, sort of the main themes. And so roughly the book opens in the early 1940s, right after Pearl Harbor. And this bulk of the book is set in the Owens Valley in California, which is sort of South Central California. 2 major themes of her book, and also the major theme of the lifetime of Owens Valley, is the Japanese internment camp that is built. It's the Order 9066 that President Roosevelt proclaimed creates the Japanese internment camps, and Manzanar was the biggest, and that opens in the Owens Valley on dry, parched land in early 1942. And Marianne and I will discuss a little bit, I think, about what that was like to build the camp on this dry, parched land. But the reason that the land is dry and parched is because in the early 1920s, Mulholland and his crew at the Los Angeles Water District created the aqueducts that stole the water from the Owens Valley and piped it all, or put it through channels, canals, and brought it all to LA. Mulholland's, one of his most famous phrases was that when people resisted this, that lived in the Owens Valley, his famous phrase was, well, we have to do what's better for the larger number and not for the few. And of course, that completely did not take care of the people, not only the people who live there, but the ecology of the land and its environment. So there is a larger picture as to what happens when you remove all the water from a very large, formerly fertile landscape. So Marianne, do you feel that that's like loosely your 2 major themes? Have I left anything out?
You've elucidated it for me. I was wondering what this book was about. I don't want to write it. Yeah, yes, you've done a wonderful job. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you.
Sure. So would you like to open? Yes.
All right. So this is in reference to the Owens Lake. And for all of you listening, it's still worth a trip down there. Acquaint yourself with the reality of what this did to the topography around the area. It's worth a
Yeah.
road trip to see what the lake looks like now and to know what it had been. It was this large body of lake. Mulholland took one look at it and thought, oh, we'll just build a big pipeline. For any of you who saw Chinatown, you kind of, the movie Chinatown, you kind of know what happened. But he piped water from Owens Lake, which is almost 200 miles to the north, piped it in a pipeline down to the city. And so that it ended up when people opened their taps in Los Angeles, it was coming from Owens Valley. What no city in the history of the world has been created that way, except in Saudi Arabia. And we did it here in this country. And none of our previous large cities had been created in that way. I mean, there is a Los Angeles River, which is a joke. It's kind of, I mean, the Chicago River is a joke, but it's a joke of the Los Angeles River. It's like a puddle that forms in your driveway. And now Los Angeles it's the second largest city in the United States, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have no water. We have no rainfall, no water. So that's what my whole novel is about. Properties of Thirst refers to the city of Los Angeles, although the book's not about Los Angeles. The book is really about this land and
Yes.
and we as humans living on it, and how we must make decisions for our future, as opposed to simply what's happening in our lives now. And one thing that happened in this topography is the internment camp for the Japanese during World War II, after Pearl Harbor, was built on federally owned land that happened to be federally owned land and happened to be owned by the state of California, as opposed to just private ownership, because the water rights had been bought up. So fortunately, unfortunately, in my political opinion, this land where the Japanese internment camp was built was on land that had previously been owned by the Water Department of Los Angeles. And the book is about that internment camp and the man who runs the internment camp. And then, of course, the terrain is the third most important character.
Yes.
In this book. And it's at the base of Mount Whitney, which is the highest point in our beloved state, and was for a long time, until we took the state of Alaska as a state, the highest point in the United States. So the whole area, I fervently say to you, is worth a boots on the ground. Go and visit it if you don't know it, because I tried to bring that into the book. I don't know whether I succeeded in doing that, but I tried to make the land a part of the importance of the book, because we as human beings living on this land require water, and where there isn't water, there has been no life. And now there are so many human beings, we're running out of land to live on. And you know, how are we going to colonize the moon with no water? How are we going to get water up there?
Right.
It's really, it bends my mind. I have no idea how we can do that. But in California, the answer to that question was, well, we'll just put it in a long tube and send it by gravity all the way downstate to Los Angeles. And it worked. And it still works to this day. I opened my spigot in Los Angeles. I have no idea where that water came from. You know,
Right.
We don't get enough rain in Los Angeles to substantiate the second largest city in the United States being there. It just is not habitable. It's just can't be done. So that's what this book is about, Properties of Thirst. That's how it got its title. It's really not about the water wars. It's about a love that happens between a man who doesn't live there and a woman who does live there. The man who doesn't live there happens to be the head of, he's also a transplant, of the Japanese imprisonment camp, which was built in Owens Valley, which I didn't know. I went all through high school. I knew nothing about it, about the fact that we as a nation incarcerated or kept at prison camps, Japanese Americans, American citizens, but no German prison camps were established because they were Caucasian, and the Japanese people were Asian. They looked different than we did, and there was more racial hatred toward the Japanese. So the two themes in Owens Valley, I know I'm going on and on in a disconnected way, forgive me. The two themes in Owens Valley are this Japanese camp and the shore and the theft by Los Angeles of the counties of the local water.
Right.
So as their water is being robbed by Los Angeles, they're getting more people imported who need water. So
And
this whole water war that
right. So remember, Marianne, as you wrote, when the book opens and the Japanese folks are showing up and the first wave of them come to build the camp,
yes,
they're actually building the camp on a dry lake bed.
yes,
And when you talked about that the landscape is the third character,
yes,
that dry lake bed is so well described in terms of the wind and the dust and how it's not arable anymore. So do you have something you were going to read about the beginning of the Japanese camp?
thank you for you're a good horse rider. I'm really feeling the pinch of your bit in my mouth. By the way, to my right, to your left, everyone, this is my daughter Laura Porzak, who drove the car to get me here.
In more ways than one. And I'm
Yes.
gonna help with the ruler
Yes,
because Marianne has limited vision.
yes. I can't remember if you said that I suffered a stroke. You did say I suffered a stroke,
No,
right?
not yet.
Oh,
I didn't. I'll tell you, would you like me to give some background about that, Marianne? Would you be comfortable? Would you like me to tell
I think
people?
I probably have more details, but certainly you can give the background. And if you make a mistake, I will just jump in.
Yeah.
We're comfortable
reason-
with everything. There are no
The
secrets.
I would
reason
appreciate it. Thank
The
you.
reason that I didn't start that way with our audience, I'll be perfectly honest, is that I'm so high on this book. And most people start interviews with you about this massive stroke you had, and I didn't want to do that. But we've already
I
started.
compliment you. Thank you.
We've
Thank
already
you.
started. So I will tell our audience that 6 years ago, you had this massive stroke that it looked very dire for a time around how well you would recover. And both in sight, mobility, memory, all of these things. And Laura did this amazing job of helping you, along with certain healthcare professionals and ultimately certain friends, to come back as the writer you are. So if to our audience, if you feel that maybe Marianne's working on several different themes, she has come an enormous distance with her stroke, but that's
You're
the
very
background.
kind. Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'll read now. I think I will read.
Well,
now.
you never know.
You never know.
You never know. We'll find out.
Well,
That's okay. The
okay.
lamp is here. Can you see right there?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so just to refresh, the United States built a Japanese internment camp near Owens Lake, which is the primary source of water. Okay, so I want to emphasize the lake because this is going to be now a description of the lake. the
Okay.
person going up to the lake to look at the property that is still owned by the city of Los Angeles, and therefore by a municipality which would be receiving all of these Japanese internees. So he's on a scouting mission to look at the land before the camp is built. And I'm just going to read this brief, well, not so brief, section where
Right.
he goes to see the land for the first time. Okay, I'm reading now. It had always been a nasty lake, sulfuric, stinking like a lesion, brackish, yellow, good for nothing other than the incubation of mosquitoes, salt flies, and the harloting illusion. Although seen from the heights of the Inyo Mountains, the lake must have seemed a gift to westward trending humans. It must have looked like gold, as lovely as a promised land, which, let's face it, can never really hold any promise without water. Even now, when Rocky, he's the hero of the book, looked down on it from his standpoint on the Whitney Trail in the Sierras, distant, ringed in white, he tasted water. But now there was another something in the distance too, a ghost, transparent, grainy, like the faded photograph or an X-ray of a shadow in the lung. Above the lake, a cloud of dust. Rocky could remember the first day he had seen it. One big fucking cloud. If he'd been living in the age of the Old Testament, he would have chalked it up to God, to a brush with what William James called a personal religious experience. And the thing about it was that it was moving swiftly, like a thing just born, gaining poise and learning, how to put this, life. For a crazy moment, he had even thought that it had eyes. If it speaks, he remembered thinking, I might have to start a church. When in the 1920s, the bastards had drained the river of pure snowmelt that fed the lake, what had been left was a brackish muck that had reached a point of no return and, hey presto, lifted off. Earth flew. They hadn't called their crime of engineering drainage, they'd called it channeling. They'd called it distributing. Sometimes they called it conveyance. Rocky called it theft. Goddamn Bill Mulholland, biggest son of a bitch ditch digger who ever crawled out of the Irish Sea, and goddamn the city he worked for, and its spawn, its thirsty ilk, its rotted soul, its bloated gullet. Fuck them all. Sounds like I use a lot of strong language in this book, but Sheryl will tell you, it's not all the way through the book. I just happened to pick the section of strongest language because that's the mood I'm in when I think about Bill Mulholland.
Yeah.
He could remember the first morning of the dust as if it had been yesterday, the way the thing had lifted off the surface, shredding after a few minutes in the wind, becoming nothing, only to return the next day and the next. A daily winnowing, not of earth, of lake, a daily winnowing of what had once been water, although sour water, and was now a sour crust, the chaff of which was like a bitter powdered sand polluting their air. Down in the city, at the end of the pipe, they had named a road after Mulholland, Road to Hell, he hoped, and there were swimming pools on private properties and fountains in the public buildings. Inside every man, he guessed there was a point at which the trigger springs, the point at which the gun, the point at which he guns the itching finger, the trigger finger. And for him, that point was reached when anybody said the words Los Angeles. Is that,
So
is that
that's
okay?
it was great. I want to tell our audience that seriously, Marianne's always been masterful with words. This novel has whole long places of just beautiful writing.
Oh, you're very kind.
So you reminded me of that. Now I want to move into Rocky and his family a little bit, but I want to say before that one of the things that the audience may or may not realize is that when Schiff shows up to look at the land, where the Manzanar is going to be built, and Schiff is the character, the guy who works for the Department of the Interior, a young man who's going to be in charge of the camp. He notices the dust right away that Marianne just read about. And Rocky spends all of his adult life trying to come up with lawsuits as to how he can take on Los Angeles, or the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And one of those lawsuits is to try and get the doctors at Manzanar to work with them about breathing that dust, because it's toxic. So this internment camp of 10,000 Japanese Americans is built on a flat lake bed that is toxic, wind and dust wise. And that plays out further on in the novel. And, again, with Rocky and his lawsuits, but let's talk about Rocky and his family. Shall I introduce the characters, or would you like to introduce the characters, like who he is and who is?
I would be personally thrilled if you did it.
All right, let's start with, so Rockwell Rhodes is the patriarch. He's the paterfamilias of the family. They have a rancheria of some size that he built by hand in the Owens Valley, and segueing a minute back to Manzanar. So Manzanar is being built next to his property. And then, so that's how the two different groups intersect. It's across the road. So Rockwell Rhodes has a twin sister. Twins run in the family, and his sister is Caswell Rhodes. And Rocky had this beloved French wife, Lou, who he met her in Chicago and whisked her to California by promising her that he would build the house that she wanted, the casita. She's a doctor, and he built her a clinic. And so
He built her a bell tower too.
Yeah, and a bell tower. And they have twins. They have fraternal twins, Stryker, the boy, and Sunny, the girl. And so the book starts with Rocky. He's in grief his entire life over the loss of his beloved wife, Lou. And that happens when the twins are 3. By now they're 19 or 20. So those are the major players. That's Rocky's family. And all of them are totally worth the price of admission in terms of getting to know who they are through the author's words. They're quite marvelous. Later on, maybe Marianne, we can mention Linwood, and we should mention Schiff, but that's Rocky's family. So we've got those. Do you want to flesh out a little? Now, how did you find Rocky as a character? How did he come to you and his family?
He came the same way that California first came to me, which was through movies. And he's sort of an American male archetype, Californian, which is kind of, we never see him in formal dress. I always imagine Rocky wearing blue denims and a work shirt and a 10-gallon hat, or at least a large hat to keep the sun off his face.
Right.
And so I think his image came to me from watching Westerns on TV and movies when I was growing up. I was born in 1947. And so Westerns really all through the 50s, that and police dramas were the two things that occupied my imaginative life
Right.
on television and movies. And that's how Rocky came to me. How I forget your question. I'm sorry.
Well, just, tell whatever you want to say about Stryker and Sunny. Probably Rocky and Sunny have the larger roles all through your book. Stryker's important and Cass is important, and how their lives
Schiff is
unfold.
really, I think Schiff as the
Schiff.
and as the transported, he says he's from Chicago, so he knows water because he lived on the side of the lakes, the Grand Lakes, the Great Lakes, and knows Lake Michigan very well because he lived in Chicago all his life. And he admired a member of Roosevelt's cabinet, and so wanted to go work in government and take his law degree and be a civil servant, something that Schiff always wanted. And he lands a job. He does finally. He takes his law degree, goes to Washington, gets hired by the State Department, and lands the job at Manzanar, building it from nothing, from the ground up. And so there are scenes in this book of the intake day when 10,000 approximately Japanese Americans arrive at this site. And we learn as readers sort of the chaos of that arrival day, because there are fellow Americans, soldiers, and fellow American administrators taking in Americans
Yes.
into what was basically a prison camp.
Right.
And all of this happened before a time when I lived, and it happened in a state in part of the United States that I was not familiar with.
Yes.
And I owe knowledge of it to the young woman to my right, who is my daughter Laura, who took me on a road trip on one of my visits to her here in California. Took me on a road trip, and we started to pass signs, Manzanar, 28 miles, or Manzanar, and I said, what the hell is that? And we both learned, I think, that it was the Japanese internment camp, which is now a national park. The government still owns the land and turned it in, gave it over to the park system. And it's kind of a Disney-fied, there's a recorded tour. You can put on headphones and walk around where the Japanese were once kept prisoners. And this was my first sighting of the place. And I thought, oh my God, I have to write a book about this. I got hit with an invisible lightning bolt.
Yeah.
Because I had never been taught it in my education. I never knew that my country did this. And it was also in the air at the time. Trying to remember. No, this happened before the border wall.
Oh yeah. You mean your trip?
My trip with Laura.
Yeah.
And the book certainly happened before the border wall.
Yeah, our audience should know that there was 10 internment camps, and Manzanar is the only one that is still able to be visited. And now it went for years with just the tiniest plaque, but now there is a memorial museum there. The reason partly that that's significant is all the other 9 camps were completely wiped away.
As if we would erase them.
As if they never existed. So Manzanar is the only one that is a remembrance of the internment camps.
To whom do we owe the gratitude of that remembrance?
Well, I thought I did plenty of research, but I didn't research that question.
Was
That
it the Japanese Americans themselves who, well,
Well-
I'll find out and let you know.
I know we'll have to redo this later and add some added addendums. I will say that there was some, you're right, there was a Japanese American group that began to go back to the camp for various anniversaries. It might have been the first one, might have been the 50th year. What I was watching a documentary about this was the very first time they came back, it was still empty land except for a tiny little plaque that had a lot of damage done to it. But the fact that they still had that empty land and they didn't like sell it to people to build on is remarkable, because all the other camps, they're not visitable, if that's a word. So yeah, and Marianne, to our audience, is talking about Schiff, who is a young Jewish man from Chicago with a law degree who gets assigned and by the Department of Interior actually to come out and be the person that sets up the camp and runs it. And he really does have a heart of gold around the fact that he's so horrified with the scale of all of it. And there's a line in this book when the Japanese show up that says something like, as the Japanese Americans got off the buses, that they faced this present being detained for crimes that no crimes were committed, or being detained around the fact that they had not done anything wrong. There were no crimes committed. This is, when you think about the enormity of that. So Schiff, over time, before he really intersects with the Rhodes family, also comes to understand with his sidekick, who's his procurement guy, I can't say that word, who's a great character. He comes to understand that he has to create ways for the Japanese people in the internment camp to keep their community alive and their culture alive, to keep despair at bay. So sports, so there's a little gardens, people start popping up between the barracks. There's eventually a kitchen that Sunny gets going. So the Japanese women can take turns cooking the foods that they are their foods. So he does what he can to bring in as much humanity as he can to the job.
I was designing him as a character. I wanted to make him a Jew because I think the Nazi camps have taken hold in the United States' population imagination, owing to cinema and Spielberg and literature. But what we did as a nation after Pearl Harbor to our own citizens has just been hidden. And that was really the flame that use of this. Yeah,
it's astonishing. Yeah. So now to bring in, let's talk a little bit about Sunny, who's fabulous. And one of the ways we get to meet Sunny, so both the grown twins are for their entire lives missing this mother that they love so much. And one of the ways that Sunny tries to reconstruct her mother, Lou, is through food. And because Lou was an amazing cook that loved her cookbooks and created all these amazing recipes. And so as Sunny is growing up, first Cass takes her to Europe to experiment and learn different foods and different tastes. But Sunny spends years trying to decipher her mother's cookbooks that are written with these enigmatic descriptions of, they don't actually measure things and even give you all the ingredients. And but they're marvelous. It's a marvelous journey of how food smells and its texture and its taste, and how discovering one's mother through food in her own writings, and Sunny's reading late at night in bed, reading cookbooks, is just a marvelous journey. How did you get so engaged with this whole food theme, which is incredible?
My father was a grocer. So my mother's father was a grocer.
Ah.
So I had produce and fresh produce chores growing up, oh, you're not doing anything? Come work in the grocery store.
Ah,
So I had that genetic fresh produce tablet established in my spine. And then as I grew up and attained height and size to stand in front of a stove and a sink and a refrigerator, I loved cooking. I love to cook. To this day, I cook. Whether or not I'm a good cook, I don't think of myself as being, I think of myself as being adequate. Laura thinks I'm a good
I
cook.
think she's a great cook.
And I love cooking for guests. I love showing my heart through my cooking. So, but I didn't know how I was going to approach, I'm not a famous chef, so I cannot use my writing credits to write a cookbook. I would love to. So I thought, well, then I'll just pretend I'm a cook. And originally I had wanted to have cards such as Sunny's mother kept put into Properties of Thirst, the book, so they would fall out of the book as someone is reading them. But that was too expensive, and Simon & Schuster said, no, we can't do that. Like it's an impossible thing to do, because there wasn't a machine that's designed to put cards in books. But that had been my original thought of, oh, what a delight for the reader to discover these cards. They thought they just bought a book and there's really recipes hidden inside. But that got set to the side in the making of the book. So that's my background with food. And I still love going to markets. And when I love going to a food market and seeing the produce. I just love it. It stirs all my senses.
So you actually create a language with food in this book, and you create the ability for Sunny, the young woman, to reimagine her mother through food and recipes. It's remarkable. It's just really
That's very kind of you to say. That's very kind of you to say. But in the way that those of us who have lost loved ones attempt to revisit landscapes, cooking was a way for Sunny, this heroine in my book, to try to get her mother back, or to try to get a sense of her mother, of who she was. And her mother, kept an herb garden outside the house, to the side of the house. And so Sunny keeps that up too. But her mother was not, she was so comfortable in her kitchen that she wouldn't write details down. She would just write these recipes in shorthand for herself.
right.
She never thought that her daughter was going to find her scribblings, or that they would be of use to her.
Right.
She hadn't created it for her daughter to read. Her daughter just found a private notebook.
Right. There's, I do want to now come back to your title, and there is a great segue here, because Properties of Thirst, both your title and then your chapter titles, is so much bigger than just the original idea of Properties of Thirst. And I say this in the sense that, I just reread your book last week, and what I began to see was how often you weave the idea, the metaphor of properties of thirst throughout your book. So I want to ask you to talk more about that, but I want to say that one of the recipe cards that Sunny finds is her mother saying properties of thirst as a flavor of something that the mother just made, a recipe. But tell us more about your title. You said a little at the beginning, but it, to me, it has multiple meanings. And
Well,
it seems very intentional.
Thank you. A property can either be a personal asset of personality or of territory.
Right.
And so I liked the play on words. This is either going to be what are the properties of human thirst? Well, dry throat, dry mouth, a need to replenish bodily fluid. So that's one meaning of the property. The second would be a property, a physical property, such as what the real estate industry is used to selling. And I liked the play on words. And I think of most of California as being properties of thirst. We're a thirsty state, not as thirsty as Nevada, but we're pretty damn thirsty, excuse my French.
Was I correct in absorbing that the properties of thirst are even relating to properties of love? It's not just water, right? Because we should tell our audience that
I hadn't thought of that.
Well, this book is also got major love stories. So the properties of thirst have to do, I thought, with longing as well as water, and love as well as water. Did I pick that up correctly?
I'm glad that I aroused that in you.
Yes.
I hadn't made it a pointed desire of mine to communicate that. Maybe it was unconscious.
Uh-huh.
But I'm thank you for that gift.
Yeah. It kept repeating itself as a theme with subtle but strong variations. There was meaning and layers of meaning, and I really noticed it the second read. Yeah. So yes. There is was something else I was going to bring up. Sorry, I just lost my train now. So Rocky, well, let's see, Marianne, I've lost my train. What did I want to go with? Food, properties of thirst. What do you think what other major themes have we missed? Do we have other places? Like, we didn't talk much about Kaz. Oh, I know what I wanted to tell you. I know.
All right.
Because I was talking about the layers of meaning with properties of thirst. I also was struck by how you can make a scene out of that's 8 sentences or something, so vivid and so tactile and so joyful and brilliant that it feels like you're in a movie is inside your head for hours when it's just this little precious scene. And I want to tell you one of my favorites, which is that Linwood, when by his ranch manager, takes the Buddhist monks to the redwood forest and they see the California redwood trees for the first time. It is the most gorgeous scene. I think we probably need to let your readers discover that, but I want to say in this venue, this moment with our audience, that this book is full of those vivid moments. They're just gorgeous.
You must be an empath to use a Star Trek vocabulary. because that is one of the things that is lifted directly from life. And that was on a trip that Laura and I took to Yosemite, wasn't it?
Good man. No, Big Sur.
Yeah.
It was Big Sur.
No,
Okay, Yosemite.
Yosemite,
Okay.
and where the redwoods were.
Sequoias up there.
It's okay, keep going in the part, and we park the car.
We parked the car, got out of the car, and there was a troop of I'm going to say Oriental men. They might have been Japanese. I mean,
And were they in Buddhist robes?
yes,
Saffron.
Okay.
yes. And they would put their heads against the trees, and then get this
Happy.
beatific smile where they had communed with the trees. And we followed them around, actually, surreptitiously, I hope, because to be in that circle of joy, the true joy that these human beings were encircling the tree and putting their foreheads right against it. You remember this?
I do remember
obviously.
this, yeah.
Am I describing it correctly?
You are, it's beautiful.
So
So
that,
you did.
but you picked the one thing that
That came from
really
reality.
happened.
Everything
It's so moving. It's so joyful and
Well, it's
moving.
right outside your door. Go stay,
Yes,
stand in.
yes. I think we're getting close maybe to turning it back over to Jamie, but there's one other thing I want to bring up, which is, and this is a tantalization for the readers. So Rocky's Rancheria is named Three Chairs.
Yes,
And there is this Emerson Thoreau connection all through the book.
yes.
And you come to understand early why he named his rancheria Three Chairs. But when you read a Marianne Wiggins book, when you get all the way through this one, there is a scene. And I will just say this to you, Marianne, because I don't want to give it away I want people to discover it on their own. But it's when we find Sunny's restaurant in Point Reyes, and there's a porch, and that's all I'm saying. But something in the beginning that was mammoth repeats itself quietly at the very end, and you do that a lot, and it's gorgeous.
Well, I tell my students that you don't start a book until you know the ending, and then you can lard the book with temptation that's fulfilled
Totally.
in the ending.
Totally.
And they look at me so angry, like, they're going to discover what the ending is as they read through it. And I go, no. You have to know the ending first. And
Interesting. Yeah.
then erase it from your mind if you need to. Pretend you don't know it, but know it. And then you'll write, every line should have a foreshadowing and create something in the reader. So that when the ending comes, it's this huge payoff.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
the fulfillment of all of
That's a quiet little, but big to me payoff, based on that there's a bunch of other payoffs too. But I read this going, oh, I loved it.
Oh, you're very sweet.
I just loved it. So,
Thank you.
so our readers out there, you have something to look forward to. So,
Thank you.
and now Jamie, you want to?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
You are.
That conversation was beautiful. I really, really
Thank you.
enjoyed myself, and I'm sure our attendees did too. I kind of had one last thought or question, and
Sure.
you have the ability to cover these American sagas with such tremendous detail, and your characters just draw you in so deeply. I mean, I was thinking about these characters weeks after I read. And you really have this ability to cover historical events that have kind of been underreported or underrepresented. And I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about how you landed on this topic.
Yes. As I said, this particular topic arose when I needed to write another book. And thanks to my daughter, I had gone to Manzanar, which is underwritten and underknown, really underknown. I mean,
Yes.
people on the East Coast, I don't think know enough about it.
Certainly in
And-
fiction.
Yeah. And that's how. And so there was an opening, I didn't have to fight off, the heroes of modern fiction to on this topic, because there was nothing. I mean, there's a small body of work of memorialists, of individuals who had been interred, who wrote of the experience, but it's not widely known. And I
No.
don't think it's known outside the state of California. And as a whole, and California was not the only location. I mean, there were internment camps all over the United States, including the East Coast. And so I think it's an underwritten part of our history. And let me jump on this bandwagon before it takes off and turns into a wagon train. I wanted to get there early, and I wanted to get there loudly, because I think that it's something that we need to know, especially since our borders are going to be I'm editing myself from saying breached, but our borders are going to be become havens, and we need to know how we have treated individuals who have not been born in this country in our history, and what prejudices we have shown. And we need to become, I think, because of my politics, more humanistic. And so that's what I am happy to give my life to writing about.
I love
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I echo the sentiment. I loved this book so much. It's honestly the
You're
best
very
book I've
sweet.
read in the last couple of years. And
Oh.
it's bold and it's unapologetic and it just has everything that you want. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, and there is one question, if it's okay, from Dalfred. Did you interview any of the survivors of Manzanar?
No, I myself do not have the privilege of knowing anyone. And so how would I meet them? I would have to send out like a public notice, survivors of Manzanar wanted for lunch with novelist. All I did was visit Manzanar more than once. And I took my writing students from USC up there actually too.
Wow.
They were all nonplussed, because it's not a generation that feels it the same way my generation does, perhaps. So no is the answer, but I did as much homework as I could. I did not make a point of me as an individual calling upon other people to give me their testimonies. I think that I do that as a writer who is habituated herself to guarding my own secrets, to guarding my creativity. And it's a very fair question to, if I were writing something as a political manifesto, I think I have an obligation to investigate and to take personal testimonies. But I'm a novelist, so therefore I have an obligation to tell an interesting story, and that requires fashioning characters that are going to serve that story. that's why I think I did not populate the book with Asian Americans, because I didn't want to steal the rights or their own stories. The people in this book are not Asian Americans,
Mhm.
but it's about a Japanese internment camp.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
beautifully. Thank you. I want to thank both of you. Cheryl, it's great. Marianne, it was great.
Thank
I
you.
also wanted to mention there's a couple people asking. Yes, this is being recorded. Everyone will receive an email tomorrow. It'll have a link to the recording. It'll have more information about when and where to get your book. It'll have other titles by Marianne and basically everything you need. So if you just watched tonight, it's okay. Really, really appreciate
I
you
couldn't
being
have had a better, I wish we could, I felt like I was having dinner with you.
Oh, it's funny you said that. I almost wanted to say, well, next time you can cook for me. So
Great.
mine
My
melt,
pleasure. Thank you.
mine melt.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
great. Well, thank you both again. And I can't wait for all of you to get your hands on your signed copy because it's going to be a great day. So
Thank you.
we'll see you tomorrow, Marianne, and you both have a really nice evening.
Thank you.
What an
Thank
honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for
Thank
you.
celebrating the book with us.
Thank you.
Of course.
Sure. Thank
Thank
you so
you,
much.
Cheryl.
Bye.
Thank you.